was talking about, then you probably want to be tweaking this part of the system up. So, yeah.
Is there any nutrients that copper keep the stalk more, help keep it upright more?
There are some traces that are good. I mean, boron's actually one. If you had deficiencies in boron, you can have problems with cell wall strength and some of these other things. I'm not across that as well as I might be. Declan, did you have a comment on?
Copper is important for cell strength.
It is, yep. So, yeah, and I guess micronutrients is a whole nother ball game, I guess. But yeah, and the extent to which you might get tie-up transiently in that decomposition process, I guess, could have an influence on how that works. So I've talked a bit about why stubble's important as far as wind erosion. Not so much of an issue in the last couple of seasons. However, we've got some good maps of the soils in the Wimmera. The pinky colour is high wind erosion risk. Don't really need to worry about the purple, what's that? The browny sort of orange colour, because that's mostly under national parks, deserts, etc. But the cropping areas there, north of the Little Desert, which is that sort of horizontal tongue in from the side there, pretty much north of that is our Northern Wimmera wheat belt. 1996, a transect survey was designed in order to look at the adoption of conservation farming practice. And so all that blue sort of mass across the top there, that's actually 876 paddocks that we look at twice a year in a drive-by survey. And so now we can start interpreting conservation farming practice in the context of what inherent soil risks are there in those paddocks. So you take it along and ask the question, okay, just because someone's retaining stubble, does it mean the soil's safe? Not necessarily. Any guesses on what was in that paddock? I think there were some brassica weeds in there. To me, that's a classic pea stubble on a high wind erosion risk soil towards the end of summer. Now, again, I showed this to the DSE guys to say, well, not all stubbles are created equal as far as protecting the soil from wind erosion. Some aren't really effective, either because they're not anchored or there's not a lot of biomass left. And I guess I created some work for myself in that, because I then had to go and kind of work it out. Yeah?
Sorry, just going back to that other slide
yeah.
where you were showing the erosion.
Yep.
You were saying the orange parts.
These bits here.
Yeah, they're mainly covered by state.
Yeah, well that's the Little Desert, and below it's a big desert with a few other reserves in there. Are you from around that way? Or?
I'm just really surprised that with supposedly natural ground covers and stuff, you've got that much erosion going on.
No, this isn't saying that there is erosion going on. It's saying that soil with no cover, the structure of the soil itself is quite weak.
Oh,
might be sandy. Yeah. So yeah, my fault, wasn't clear on that. So yeah, there are different soil types which have different, I guess, aggregate strengths and the like, and can relate to the biological content as well, to sort of glue that stuff together. So here's a pea stubble after the sort of first really windy day in summer. So that'll be the eastern fence line. And again, so pea stubbles aren't necessarily an effective stubble against wind erosion. Now the picture in the corner there tells you a little bit about where I'm going next, and that is I wanted to go out and actually put some numbers on how effective different stubbles are. So I convinced management that we really needed a 9 horsepower fan. Now you'll see up here we've got, there's a Kestrel mounted there to monitor airspeed at 600 mil high. There's one down between the rows at more or less soil level. There's another set out here. What I was looking at was how protective that stubble is of the soil from that fast moving air. Because the theory is that the stubble will raise the fast moving air off the soil surface and it won't pick it up. And just for your entertainment, that's what that does. And it does get this boring, even if you're out there for 5 minutes waiting for it to do an average airspeed. So with this, I can test a whole bunch of stuff. I can test stubbles at different heights, whether you're sowing, say, north-south, in which case, in our environment, the most erosive winds are a cool change coming from the west after a northerly. And you've got that cold air like a broom just pushing down, pushing stuff up in the air, and then the front just pushes it along, which is often why you'll see, and again, as mentioned earlier today, that classic big wall of dust. And if anyone saw that stuff coming out of Phoenix, Arizona on the TV the last week or so, they've had some magnificent sort of looking dust storms, and it's that front just sweeping it up and pushing it along. So for us, crop row orientation has a fair bit to do with how protected those soils are as well. And stubbles are pretty effective at catching stuff passing by too, but this is just remnant stubble in an otherwise burnt paddock, and you can see, you know, there's a fair bit of stuff trapped in there, well above the original soil level. So that got me to this. And again, reflecting back on the map I had up before, you've got high wind erosion risk in pink, yellow was moderate, and green was low risk. And so if you think of these sorts of stubbles, canolas and cereal, they're well anchored, they're often left a bit taller, really quite protective. So you're getting about a 70 to 80% reduction in airspeed at the soil level compared to what you're seeing at 600 mil high. Beans weren't that great, but then you look at a bean stubble, particularly if it's been a reasonably heavy crop, a moderate crop, there's lots of heavy chunks of that trash sitting there, actually coating the surface. So in the main, it's not very protective of the airspeed at a low height to the soil, but there's not much soil actually at risk. Once you go down to chickpeas, there's not a lot of biomass there. Peas and lentils are actually hard to measure because we've had these wetter summers since I've been allowed to run that fan in someone's dry stubbles in the middle of summer, which was a health and safety thing we had to arm wrestle about. We're not here to start fires in your stubbles. Peas and lentils were actually chock full of weeds in the last couple of summers. I didn't really get any effective numbers, but in the main, there's about a 5 to 12% protection, and compared to bare earth, that's almost the same. So there seems to be very little. So looking at that, I just used the stoplight colour scheme there to say green's pretty safe on that combination of soil type risk and management risk. When you get out to the high wind erosion risk soils, peas and lentils in particular, I think you can modify that risk by, say, sowing them into the standing cereals or standing canola stubbles. And that's what, again, we saw that in one of the farmer presentations in the other room. Lentils kind of trellising up a bit, they're a bit higher. Also, even if you take them off pretty low in a lentil harvest, you should still have a bit of stuff left there to hold the soil together. Not ideal, but a far better managed risk than some of those bare earth sort of moonscape pea stubbles that we saw before. The other thing that's happening is during the drier years that we have had, we had a move back into a dominant cereal proportion of cropping, at the same time at the expense of pulses dropping to a lower level in the practice. We also see, and I'd love to have had data going back further, but it wasn't collected at the time, so we had oilseeds drop down, and in 09, out of 876 paddocks in the northern Wimmera, we had 6 paddocks, average size of 50 hectares or so. Vetch actually sort of took up the slack there, but now they're crossing back over again. And again, there's no surprise with the wet profile, and I imagine this year would be a fair bit bigger. By all accounts, a whole lot bigger. So we'll wait and see on that. I only get the data for this year in about November, so the jury's out until then. But some pretty hefty predictions have been made, so we'll see how we go there. So moving on, I've talked about stubbles being good at protecting your soil from blowing away. I showed you that even where there's drift going on elsewhere, it's pretty good at trapping it. And what I wanted to do was to get out there with some real proper measuring equipment and measure, say, downwind of a bare earth stubble, a bare earth cultivated paddock after harvest, and also a standing wheat stubble. So I was scrounging around for equipment, and eventually the EPA said, well, we've got 2 of these things. These are called laser scattering dust monitors. And what they do is they take in an airstream in here, about 1.5 litres a minute, passes it into this machine, which has got a little cell in it that shines a laser through the airstream.